Skirmishes around the world abound. We have a conflict between Israel and the Palestinians in Gaza. We have a conflict between Israel and Iran that is being played out in both countries. And, of course, let us not forget the Ukraine, which is still very much involved in conflict with Russia. It seems sometimes that the whole world might be a powder keg ready to explode. I hope not. But it bears asking the question. Tyler Gray is a former Delta Force member and is here to help us figure out what in the world is going on in the world and how we achieve peace. Now, you may know um, Tyler better from his time as Trent Sawyer on the television episode SEAL Team. He served as both producer, director, writer, and an actor on that series that ran for 7 years on CBS. And you can now catch it on Paramount Plus. Tyler Gray, welcome to The Truth.
Yes, thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So, do we need to worry about the Israeli Iran war any longer now that Donald Trump dropped those big bad bombs in Iran on their presumed nuclear facilities?
Um, you know the the term worry. It's one of those things where, at the end of the day, there's so many things. You said it at the beginning of your when you started talking about. There's a lot going on in the world today. You got Ukraine. You've got a ton of stuff that we're seeing with, for lack of a better term, what I'm calling the Cold War, or the the lukewarm war with China, and yeah, I look. I think the Iranian threat, for lack of a better term, and the conflict that's going on there, I don't think it's something that we should be as concerned about as, let's say the Chinese threat that's happening on our homeland right now. So, or even, you look at North Korean hackers, and there's constant, what I'm calling, low, you know there's constant infrastructure and business attacks and hacks and cyber attacks. Those are constant and, unrelenting. So I personally think those are more of a threat than really anything with Iran right now, especially after the dropping the bombs on the nuclear facility. That being said, it is a concern, and there's things to be aware of, but I don't think it's as pressing as those other issues, in my opinion.
President Trump says that we obliterated Iran's nuclear arsenal, particularly their uranium. If that's true, what happened to the uranium? When the bomb goes down 300 feet and explodes and there's uranium there, does it explode as well? I mean, I assume it's volatile.
Um, so the way those bombs are designed, and similar munitions like that, what they're really designed to do, and this is, the lay definition, but what they're designed to do is really collapse the structure. They're not designed as much to, fragment and blow it up, as much as it's designed to kind of create this massive expansion and contraction, which will collapse the subterranean structure on itself. So my assumption is that any of the uranium there, whether it was enriched or not, was probably buried under itself. The uranium, I believe, is probably buried within the collapsed structure itself. That's what I believe.
Are there long term consequences to that? Is that a dangerous condition?
I mean, in my opinion, highly, highly, highly more than likely. I don't see how you could, drop that level of explosive on that type of structure and it not create some massive level of contamination. I don't see how that's possible. I could be wrong. That being said, I also fully believe that Iran, the Iranian regime, doesn't care at all. And I think they like, they did ironically after, uh, sorry, the, the Chernobyl. I believe the Iranian regime is going to send people in there to do what they're doing right now, which is, with excavators and, try and assess damage and start quote unquote cleanup. And I don't think they probably know how bad the potential contamination is or could be. And even if they do, I don't think they'll care for the crews working there.
I am so clueless on this subject. I have no insight at all, but just intuitively, I would think that if the uranium was breached or tampered with or exposed somehow and it's buried 200 or 300 feet underground, my instinct would be leave well enough alone and just let it sit there. And I don't know what the life is of uranium. I assume that there is some. Uh,
It it's longer than our lives.
yes.
So, yeah, to your point, I mean, I agree. Look, and let me clarify, be uh, taken the wrong way. I agree with you. I think with the facility collapsed on itself, even if there was, enriched uranium, highly more than likely the contamination would be relatively safe, in the sense that it's underground, it's buried. I mean, if you look, you know, cap, lack of a better term. So it's probably safe if they left it alone. But based on what they're doing right now, I don't think they're going to leave it alone. And if they start digging, I think it's going to open up the area and the people to some level of contamination. That's my expectation, but obviously it
I
could go
would
either way.
assume that someone is monitoring radiation to determine whether there has been any leaks or not proximate to the bombing sites. Um, so let me ask you, I'm a big fan of Donald Trump. I voted for him. I've voted for him 3 times and have had the pleasure of spending time with him one on one. And I think he is the greatest president, was the greatest president of our lifetime in his first term. And I am hopeful that he will uh, eclipse the accomplishments of Trump 1.0 in his second term. He's promised repeatedly that if elected, that he would end the Ukraine-Russian war on day one. We're now coming up on the 6th month, and is there any end in sight to the end of that war, where over 1 million people, by the way, have died?
Yeah,
What a
yeah.
senseless loss of life. And do these leaders, I'm not talking about Trump, I'm talking about Putin and Zelensky, do they not have any regard for the dignity of human life? I mean, is it just ho hum another day at the office for them? I mean, I just don't know how they live with themselves, realizing that they have brought untold grief to a family multiplied times 1 million or more. How do you sleep at night? How do you look at yourself in the mirror? How do you live on this the face of this earth? My conscience would not allow it.
Yeah, you got to think of it this way. I mean, I actually happened to be, and I won't tell the story because it's a long story. But I happened to be, I was a bodyguard after I got out of the military for almost 10 years, and I happened to be bodyguarding a very wealthy person, and I was at an event with where George W. Bush was speaking, and it was very small, very elite. And Bush, this is, I don't know, 10 years ago now, and Bush told a story about Putin, and I'll summarize it. It's actually hilarious, and Bush was like a stand-up comedian, which it was amazing to see. But anyways, the story was essentially that he had this dog. I think it Buddy. I forget his name, and Putin comes to wherever in the U.S., sees the dog, and Bush is like, yeah, it's my dog, and Putin was kind of like, that's your dog? He's like, yeah, it's my dog, and then it cuts to Bush goes to uh, wherever in Russia, and he's at his Camp David. That's what I was trying to refer to. His, the Putin Camp David, and these two massive dogs. I forget, it was some Russian breed, but these huge two Russian dogs come up, and Putin goes, Those are my dogs, twice as big as Buddy. And Bush went, that's Putin. That's just who he is. Like that's his character. He's that guy
This is
that'll.
a radio show. We're governed by rules of the FCC, but I'm going to take a risk and just say, I've never met Putin, but that sounds to me like somebody with a very small penis that has to somehow build himself up through the size of his dog. That's
It was
bizarre.
and again, it was a
What's the
much
point of that?
longer. Yeah, it was a much longer, more funny story the way he told it. But the point of the story, I've always remembered that anytime Putin stuff comes up, I've always remembered Bush's, and that's his firsthand experience for years. And so I've always remembered that. And at the end of the day, that's who Putin is. You also have to remember that he was a KGB officer.
Yeah.
So
So was
he
George
doesn't
Bush's
care.
father.
Yes, but you look at Putin. I mean, Putin has the list of people he is straight up obviously assassinated that have questioned him or any of those things is long. I mean, a lot of people get thrown out of buildings, or sorry, jump out of buildings that defy Putin. So you have to
And
look at
commit
this more.
suicide with 2 bullets to the head.
Exactly. So, and again, partially you go, that's Putin. And to be fair to Putin, let's be honest, partially that's just kind of Russia, right? That it is what it is. That's, somewhat of a culture there. And so,
Yeah, but that
yeah,
Russia, I was surprised to learn, has a very large Christian population. And,
the majority is,
I
the
really
majority is Russia. Or
take those
Christian.
10 Commandments very seriously. Thou shalt not kill. And I mean, I just don't think Putin has a very good prospect for his life in eternity.
To that point, I've had a friend that's been fighting in Ukraine now for, gosh, I think probably 2 years now since he got involved. And, I know a decent amount of more frontline stuff from him. And at the end of the day, yeah, it's shocking to me that it hasn't been solved. But you're kind of in a position now where you've got two sides that are so committed, and their, quite frankly, reputation, not just of the country but directly on the leaders, is on the line, and neither wants to give. I mean, at the end of the day, it's a stalemate, no question. It's a stalemate. It should have never started. It should have ended long ago. It still hasn't ended. I think Trump is surprised. I think what he thought was going to happen. I think he's been a little surprised by the resistance to end it on both sides, for reasons that are probably, again, a little bit of the leaders have to save face. I think that's why this hasn't ended.
Well,
And
I have no knowledge, no direct evidence of this. I do think Putin is a different person today than he was 6 years ago when Trump engaged with him more regularly. I think that two thoughts come to mind. One is, I don't think we're blameless with the Ukraine-Russia war.
100% we're not.
We were going
no doubt about
to
it.
bring Ukraine into NATO, and Putin interpreted that to mean that we were going to put nuclear arms on his border. That never worked well when Russia tried to do it. Soviet Union tried to do it to us in 1960, any differently than it's going to work for us now when we're the aggressor. So let's put that little factoid out there. And secondly, I think that Biden, the dumbass that he is and was as president, and I don't shy away from labeling him that way. People want to give him a pass because of his age and presumed senility. I give him a pass for nothing. I think he is a morally corrupt and defective person, and I think that he is corrupt to his very core. Now, having gotten that off my chest, I will just say that I think that as bad as he is, he's also stupid, because I think he drove Russia into the arms of China. And I think that could possibly explain why Putin is no longer, seems to be reasonable in our eyes, because he has aligned himself with world's second or third strongest empire, and he feels emboldened by that. That's just the world according to John. Who knows whether I'm right or not? But that I watch this stuff pretty closely and read and study it every day. That's sort of the perception I've got. What do you think?
Well, there's first of all, if you listen to longtime Russian expert or American experts on Russia, it's pretty obvious that look, I don't agree with the war in Ukraine. I don't agree with what happened. I don't agree with the death. I don't agree with it. That being said, from Putin's perspective, even though I don't feel that it was justified to do what he did, or I should more say, as a person who fought in two wars, I really don't agree he went about it specifically, but I do agree that to a certain degree, what we were doing with Ukraine by flirting with them, being in NATO, and the things we were doing, it was a red line that he did establish. He said what he would do if that red line was crossed, and we and NATO were crossing that red line. So I don't fault him being upset, because again, I think we're absolutely more culpable than we're acting. I do think the administrations, like you're saying as well, have kind of fanned those flames. And to your last point, I do not see why we are not more close with Russia. It's not 1952 here. I don't see why. I don't see why there's any reason why we couldn't, uh, why we're still on opposite sides, if that makes sense. With all we have in common, it just seems a little. Um, it just seems, a lot of these nations that are quote unquote communist aren't really communist. To call China communist in a way, I mean, their economy is not communist in the sense that they've got uh, all these, I forget what they're called, but the economic centers that are allowed to do free trade and all these different things. So it's like all these nations have joined together that actually don't really have as similar governments as the governments are acting they are, if that makes sense.
Well, I
Uh,
definitely think that there is a trend in China to move towards capitalism. They certainly have a lot of United States capitalist companies that are doing business there, and
yeah,
are
yeah, and that's my point. Like, the way they're doing business isn't, and actually, if you go down the rabbit hole, which I didn't do enough, but I know enough to know they started these. I forget what they were called, but these trade zones where essentially anyone within that zone could do business in a completely different way than the rest of China. And that was done like 30 years ago, and that's kind of what set up the economic, rise of China in its economy, and in as a global player on the global stage. So it's really interesting like you said, I feel like there's a push going that direction. Yet at the same time, the Chinese government obviously has an absolute stranglehold overall over all those companies, and so
no
obviously
question.
there's a lot of, yeah, no
Yeah,
question.
that
So
that that's therein lies the rub. And when you ask rhetorically, why can we not just all get along with Russia? I have a very simple answer: we cannot trust them. But then I sit back and I wonder, and I think I have an intellectual obligation to wonder, can they trust us? I watched Trump with Maria Bartiromo on Sunday. It was a great interview. If you haven't seen it, I commend it to you and our listeners. You can go on YouTube and watch it. And Maria Bartiromo and I have been saying the same things for the better part of 3 or 4 years, and that is that China really is the evil empire, and that they have invaded our country. They've got police stations, 150,000 fit military men living here. They flooded our southern border with fentanyl. I could go on and on. I won't task our listeners with having to listen to it again. And Trump somewhat stoically looked at her and said, "Well, do you think we're not doing those things to them?" And that really gave me pause. And I think, I just don't know how we get the world to come to a place where we can live and let live. Joe Biden said one thing in 4 years that I felt like had some merit, even though it was a lie. They asked him what our relationship was with China, and he said, "Well, I would say we're competitors." Well, I don't think we're competitors, but I do. And I think, but a lot of our competition is to see who can build the biggest, baddest, most powerful military. But I think if we could somehow turn down that heat, what percentage of our GDP and of the GDP of the countries around the world just stopped military spending today? Just, we all sign a pact, we sign it in blood, no military spending, period. And we take that money and we put it into our respective GDPs. How much better off would our people be? We could cure cancer, stop illiteracy. No one in our country would be homeless, shirtless, or wanting for food. I mean, that seems like such a noble and potential goal if we could get people to sign up to it. But I guess as failed or flawed human beings, we're just not capable of that. There's something about the spirit of mankind that wants to fight and feels the need to fight. I guess because that's the only way I can explain the succession of wars that have occurred just in my lifetime. Starting with my dad was in World War II. I was old enough when I was born to acquire some sense of World War II. I wore my dad's army hat, and
Yeah.
I have his foot locker from World War II today, just in the other room here. And so I have vestiges of World War II in my DNA. And then we saw Korea, and then Vietnam, and then in the modern era we've seen two wars in Iraq, and then Afghanistan that lasted 12 or 15 years. Russia was in Afghanistan before we were for 12 years. I mean,
Yeah.
what the hell? And then we're on the
So
brink. It feels like with China, if they move on Taiwan, enough of
there's a
the
critical
madness.
there's a critical number that I want to throw out there that is so critical. So I grew up in the 80s and 90s, mainly, and
You
that
youngster,
was
you.
a that was yeah that was a strange time, and here's why. Since its founding in 1776, the United States has been at war for approximately 222 out of 249 years.
That's a
This
staggering
means
statistic.
this means the US has been involved in conflicts for roughly 89% of its existence, with only 27 years considered years of peace. And a heavy amount of those years, by the way, was in the 80s and 90s. Okay. In the 80s, you had some very small conflicts, but not any wars. Vietnam stopped in
No, I think the
77.
American public was so sick of the Vietnam War,
Yeah.
and if anything good came out of Vietnam, that would be it. We lost our appetite for war until
Yeah.
we were like a drunk and we forgot the hangover, and now we're not back in it, but yeah, I don't think it would take much to just push us. And I think that's what I fault Biden for the most is that he openly and notoriously gave permission to Zelensky to use armaments that we supplied them to be fired into the heartland of Russia. I mean, it is just by the grace of God that did not catapult us into a nuclear uh, a war with Russia. I think, and Putin threatened it. I mean, he made no secret that nuclear was on the table. I think we came
Yeah.
closer than most people realize. That's just my sense.
Hey, so the thing with that is, Putin's not stupid. Putin's actually he's very smart in a lot of ways, even though, look, he makes mistakes. I think the invasion was one of them, but he's not stupid. When he's rattling his nuclear saber, Putin knows that if he does anything, even low yield tactical nukes, it's not going to go well. And so I think that was part of his strategy, was to threaten that. But look, at the end of the day, it's one of those things where we are in a position with these. We've been at war for so many years, and the thing that I learned being in two wars, being in many different countries, is that, and I'm going to make up a number, but 95% of people in every country I've ever been to, whether it's Iraq, Afghanistan, you name it, are relatively decent people who want to raise families, you know, work, provide for their families, spend time with their friends, etc. And 5% of everyone, and again, it doesn't matter if you're talking about there, here, 5% of the people in those countries just want to mess things up for everyone else. It's just, as you said earlier, it's something inherent in our design, for lack of a better term, that just makes some people want to control others, because ultimately all wars come down to one thing: it's someone trying to enact control over another group. And I don't see that changing anytime soon. And though it would be amazing to take that money from military spending and use it on helping people, at the end of the day, I do agree with Trump's strategy of peace through strength, because I've seen it
Yeah,
firsthand. That
there's
that
no other
five
way.
percent,
There's no other
that five
option.
percent, that's all they respect. All they respect truly
Well,
is
they're to
force.
some extent bullies, and I've got the paradigm that,
Well,
everybody wants to be significant. I want to be
yeah,
significant. You want to be
yeah,
significant. What's the
yeah,
matter with wanting
yeah.
to be significant and make a difference in the world? Some people want to be significant by building things and building people up. Other people look at a more expedient way to be significant by tearing down. It's so much easier to tear down, criticize, demean than it is to build up. And so that's just sort of, again, that's another part of the
I
world according to John. We're going to do a new segment on the truth called The World According to John. But that's kind of what I believe, because 72 years of observation, I think I've got some insight into the human condition, and that's sort of the way that I see it. I know a small handful of people from Iran, and they are, to a person, they are well educated. They are respectful of others. They dress like you and I do. They are very reasonable people and successful in their own right. And I've engaged with them on what's the matter with Iran, and it's not Iran, it's the radical leaders of Iran.
Yeah,
And
it's the regime, not the people.
we've got our share of that in our country. You look at the
Uh,
uh, our political dynamics. I think both parties are have bad elements. The fringe of the Republicans are no better than the fringe. Well, I can't say that. That's not true. I think the fringe element of the Democratic Party are among the worst I've ever seen. I mean, but I'll
it
come back to that at another time and place. But the Republican Party, though, has our fringe right wing sort of crazed component as well. But then you break it down, I'm like, okay, well, what does that mean? What are they crazed about? And most of it is tied up in religion, and most of the religious dogma that they espouse, I agree with. So maybe I'm part of that crazed element of the Republican Party. I don't know. I'm getting myself confused.
well, you look, in my experience, whether it's political parties or whatever. At the end of the day, what it comes down to is no one, or very few people, do the wrong thing truly feeling that it's the wrong thing. Everyone comes down to the fact that everyone is trying to do the right thing. We just have very different ideas of what the right thing is or should be.
Yeah.
And the one thing I kind of, you talked about people and how categorizing, for lack of a better term, people. I came up with this thing called the three C's. There's three types of people: consumers, creators, and conquerors. And the creators are creating things, creating opportunities, creating good things. Consumers don't really create, they just consume. And then the conquerors just want to conquer everything, take from the consumers and the creators, not by creation or work, but by force. And again, it's sad that it exists in the human condition, but I don't think anyone who truly sees reality for itself really could deny that there's just some people that want to do others harm, and we have to protect not just our our families, our communities, but also our state, our country, and to a degree even the world from people with that mentality. And I think that by bombing the nuclear, Iran is, in my opinion, very laughable with the rhetoric they say, because on one hand, they'll be saying, "Oh, we wanted it for power, electricity," and then on the other hand, they'll post a picture of a mushroom cloud and say that we have a surprise that the world will remember for centuries. And those two things, you can't say one and then also say the other. They don't go together.
Yeah.
And so I think they were, in my opinion, as who did special operations missions based on intel, the Israeli intel for Iran during this whole situation was shockingly accurate. I don't know exactly the details of it, obviously, but it was accurate to the point where they were targeting individuals, not just targeting individuals, but targeting them in a high rise in their room on a floor, and then taking out that room or that floor, and not the rest of the building. So they had very, very, very accurate intel. And so when Trump said, "Hey, we think they were not days, but some degree close to a nuclear device," I'm believing it based on the intel that I did see them action, and the quality of it. And we also know they had people, they had Mossad agents in country. There's no question about it.
Well, I think Mossad
So,
has always been credited with being one of the best intel agencies in the world. And so I think your observations are right on. You've written a book called Forged in Chaos, A Warrior's Origin Story. Tell us about the book. Where do we get it? How's it doing? And what's the theme of the book?
yeah, so it actually comes out literally 2 weeks from today, July 15th. The
Congratulations.
book is, yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's been a long journey. So what the book is about really is my journey from, it covers my whole life pretty much, but it really is about trying to change the paradigm within the veteran and first responder communities of the problems that we're seeing, the suicide epidemic. And the current paradigm is we're being told it's PTSD, and I was told that for years. And after you know working on myself for well over a decade, I came to a lot of realizations, and the problem is a lot different than we're being told. And so the book essentially covers my life, how I came up with my solutions, and hopefully my solutions that I came up with in the book, and my description of the what I consider the real problem, not the symptoms, but the true disease, will hopefully provide a light in the dark for veterans and first responders, like to help them through the dark, like I was in for so many years.
Well, God bless you for that. And sounds like you're doing God's work. We don't treat our vets
Trying.
very well, do we?
I so now, having wrote the book and went through this whole journey, I mean, I'll say this: yes and no. And here's what I mean by that. No, veterans are not getting the help they need, but I don't think it's intentional by the government, by the VA, and the people that work at the VA. I think the whole thing has, good intent on an individual basis, but as an institution, institutions are very different than individuals, the government. And so the problem I'm seeing is that, I mean, how broken fundamentally is our healthcare system? Super broken. And people have to see that the VA is just that same system, except ran solely by the government. It's really not fair, in my opinion, to expect that to give veterans the help they need, because it's based already on a fundamentally broken system that is truly designed to treat symptoms and never cure the disease. And that's what we're seeing with our veterans, and even the disease we're being told it is. I at this point feel that I can prove that is not the actual disease.
And is that what you deal with in your book? Is that the thrust of it?
Yes, absolutely. I basically talk about, what the, and I'll just say it this way because it's kind of an easy way to explain it. If PTSD awareness and treatment options are at an all-time high. And yet the problem of veterans, committing suicide is getting worse. So if treatment and awareness is at an all-time high and the problem is getting worse, then to me that's a red flag. Logically, that tells me then what they're saying is the problem isn't the problem, because if it was, it would be getting better.
Yeah.
And I identify in the book what I believe the real problem is, which isn't, by the way, one thing. It's a cluster of things, and I pick that apart, separate them, explain them, and then provide solutions for them in the book. That worked for me, and hopefully that will work for other people.
So what wars did you serve in?
Afghanistan and Iraq.
Yeah, I assumed that, but I didn't
Yeah,
want to
and
leave.
then I actually got blown up in Sadr City, in which is a neighborhood in Baghdad, and got medically retired. So
My
I was,
gosh.
in and out of surgeries for 4 years. It was a long recovery. Then I went through a period of, in hindsight, no doubt, clinical depression and identity loss and lost purpose and all these different things, which again were not awesome at the time. But now I look back at all that, and really it was a blessing, because that experience is what has provided me ultimately with the answers that I'm sharing with other people now. And I feel very, very confident in the book's ability to help not just the veterans or first responders themselves, but also immediate family and loved ones that may be trying to understand uh, why those people are acting and behaving in the ways they are.
Now I was just trying to remember. Are you familiar with Jack Carr, the author?
Oh yes, oh
So
yes, yeah, yeah,
he's been on
absolutely,
our show, and
yeah,
he's written all nonfiction except for
yeah.
the
You mean all fiction?
all fiction except
Yeah, yeah,
for the attack on our embassy in Beirut, which is a
yeah. Mm,
nonfiction work, which
yeah,
is very compelling. All right,
yeah.
well, thank you so much, Tyler Gray, author of Forged in Chaos: A Warrior's Origin Story, and also I would have to say a patriot, a hero who has put himself on the line for his country. We thank you from the depths of our heart for your service, and we certainly wish you well and hope you'll come back on and join us again. It's been a fun conversation.
Yes, except next time in person.
Let's do that. We're new neighbors. I look forward to
Yeah,
meeting you in
absolutely.
person. All right.
Same. Thank you so much, sir. Have a good one.